Okay, my name's Jackie Jacob. I am the coordinator for the E-Extension Small and Backyard Flocks Community of Practice. Uh, I'm glad you could join us today. We try to have a webinar once a month, and as Mark said, they are recorded, and then within a couple of days they're posted online. You can revisit it, or you can tell somebody else to come and watch it if you found it useful. We have several more coming up, so check out our website at extension.org/poultry, which I'll put into the chat box in a minute, and check us out on Facebook. Our presentation for today is choosing and using disinfectants for small and backyard flocks. And our presenter is Dr. Greg Martin from Penn State University. And he has a lot of experience with poultry and all aspects of it, and I'm sure he'll do a good job. I'm going to go on mute so nobody hears me coughing. It's all yours, Greg.
Well, good day, everybody. Gregory Martin here. Just to give Jackie some feedback, if you can put in the chat whether you can hear me or not, that would be a good thing, because I don't want to speak to myself. But yes, I am a poultry extensionist at Penn State University, and good, thank you, Tammy. I'm one of the few extensionists that's still stationed in a county office. I'm a statewide extension specialist, but I work in the largest populated poultry area within the state. So I do handle a lot of calls from backyard enthusiasts and small flock operators. We do have a large number of flocks that will be under 3,000 birds in size, yet they're larger than 100. So we do have flocks that are in that mid-range state. We do have a number of birds that are pastured poultry, as you can see in the picture here, and everything in between. So organic versus non-organic. And I'm going to kind of structure this talk a little bit with my feet in both buckets, because when we talk about organic production, there are some limitations as to what we can use and deploy as we speak about disinfection and trying to clean things up around the farm. Let's see if this will work. Okay, nothing's happening. There we go. Okay, so a lot of times we're working with things that we cannot see, and here's just a few ideas of what we're looking at. For example, we're looking at bacteria in the upper left-hand side. This is Salmonella enteritidis. If you ever had food poisoning, this is the bug that causes food poisoning. It looks like this. It's a filamentous bacteria. Ebola and influenza. Influenza is a virus. It's different from a bacteria in the fact that it needs a host in order to survive, where bacteria can live all by itself as long as it has a food supply. Influenza and other viruses actually float around and then invade healthy cells in order to live and to replicate. And that's why these pose a hazard to us as well. So there's lots of things that we worry about at the microscopic level, and because we can't see them, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not there. Especially when we think about foodborne illnesses, we always think that bacteria is always present no matter where we are in the food chain. Just to give you an idea of that, these are Petri dishes that were pressed with hands before and after washing. And so just looking at hand washing, hand sanitizing, you can see the benefits to doing this. It also points out the idea of what we're going to talk about today, which is disinfection. And this plate here, I would classify as disinfected. What that means is that the amount of germs that we normally see in the environment has been greatly reduced. That's where the idea of dis is there. Infection means, of course, it's below the count to where it becomes infectious, or where it'll be to where we get sick. So don't confuse disinfection with sterilization. Sterilization would mean that this entire plate would be clean or sterile, and you wouldn't see any growth at all. What disinfection does is takes the general bacteria levels that we see in the environment and reduces them to a manageable level. And that's what we're trying to push forward as we're trying to clean and disinfect our poultry facilities, no matter the size. So what we're looking for is a reduction in the amount of germs, not necessarily the elimination. The only time I would think about totally eliminating something is when we actually need sterile environs to work in. And that would be something similar to an operating room of type of situation. And we don't see that usually in our poultry flocks unless you're doing some type of surgery in the backyard. Most of the time, we don't worry about that. So we're looking for a reduction in the germs that we're looking at. And I have to talk about this as well, that when we think about cleaning and disinfection, this is all part of good biosecurity. And to do good biosecurity, you need to have the proper attitude. If you cut a step in the process, or you try to cut corners, you're not really going to have that good an outcome. So to me, biosecurity and all the elements of biosecurity is more of an attitude than a practice. You got to have the right mindset as you approach this task in order to have a proper outcome. So don't cut corners. And sometimes people get themselves into trouble thinking that a little is good, more is better. Not necessarily in this type of subject area. And as we look at biosecurity as well, there's basically 3 methods that we look at to prevent viruses and bacteria and other things from getting into our flocks. We can put up physical barriers. Physical barriers are something similar to boots and gloves and garments and things like that that prevent pathogens from coming into our flock on our clothing. Chemical barriers are those chemicals that we put in place to help kill and stop bacteria and viruses from moving into our flocks. And when we think about disinfection, a lot of times we reach for those agents that offer us chemical protection. But we can protect ourselves a lot of times just by trying to keep things neat and clean, keeping the physical barriers from actually coming into contact with the birds in the first place. And then logical barriers are those things that we do logically to help keep diseases and other things from coming in. So if you had, for example, a dead bird die, you would not want to pick up that bird and move it to another flock. That's just a logical thing that we would not want to do. And logic tells us then we would actually take that dead bird, put it in a bag or double bag it and throw it in the garbage. That's a physical barrier that we logically place into the system so that it keeps our birds safe. So if you think about it, when we talk about C&D, we're basically employing almost all 3 of these at the same time when we're approaching cleaning and disinfection of our farms. And it should be a normal practice. In fact, a lot of times when we think about it, there's a lot of procedures that we practice on commercial farms all the time when people are coming onto our farms to visit, or if we're doing practices on the farm with our birds. And so, the idea of visitors logs, restricting access to the birds and so forth are all parts of good biosecurity. And as you can see here, cleaning and disinfection, here's this guy here disinfecting his pickup wheels as he's leaving a farm with a simple hand sprayer and a simple common disinfectant. He's actually helping prevent disease spread throughout the area. So you can do the same thing at home. It doesn't require rockets, it's not rocket science, but it's certainly something that you can do, especially at times when there's disease issues within your area. You could actually We actually had some farms and some small flocks that actually survived the high path AI break in the Midwest because of two things: their isolation from other birds and the level of biosecurity that they performed on their farms. So regardless of size, biosecurity is an important part of this, and C&D is an important part of biosecurity. So when we look at the molecular level, there's a lot of things in play when we're thinking about cleaning and disinfecting and choosing the right disinfectants for the types of surfaces that we're trying to C&D. We call it C&D, cleaning and disinfection. This blue line here represents a surface on, say, a drinker or the floor of a chicken coop. This yellow band represents a biofilm, and we see biofilms form from time to time in different areas of our farms. That's basically a layer of biological material that's left by different organisms that inhabit the area. So anytime you feel a surface that feels kind of slimy, that is a biofilm, and we see that sometimes in wet areas of the chicken coop. These little gray or brown areas are actually dirt, could be litter, could be sand or actual soils that we see. These are common to a lot of things we have. A lot of times it's materials such as litter that has what we call fines and little tiny particles. These things actually will stick to biofilms and create a layer that keeps us from disinfecting the actual surface we want to disinfect. So if this was a waterer and we have a slimy biofilm there, and then somebody inadvertently maybe was adding extra chips, litter chips or something to the area, and dump some of that into the drinker, well, now we have these three things here. And then lastly, the green is organic matter. And as you know, when chickens eat, they give up some stuff too. And a lot of times we see chicken manure in places where it shouldn't be. And so this is highly sticky, highly viscous, and can create biofilms if there's enough of it there. And so, when we have to clean and disinfect, there's two steps, or actually three. We actually have to clear, then clean, get that biofilm off, and then finally disinfect in order to get everything off and cleaned and disinfected and removed from the surfaces we're trying to do. When we think about waterers, I always like to wash waterers at least every other day, or at least dump out the water so that these biofilms don't even form. But a lot of times we don't know if they're there or not unless you're actually feeling the surfaces as you're cleaning. So a lot of times folks will add a disinfectant to the water as they're working, or at least rinse with a disinfectant to help kill any organisms that were left behind after the cleaning and clearing portion of the C that we call cleaning for disinfection here. So to me, when we talk about C&D, cleaning is actually more important to me than the disinfection step. If I had my druthers, whether to use a disinfectant first or just to use soap or some type of cleaning agent, I would always vote for the cleaning agent, simply because by removing the materials that we have at present, the idea is you're reducing numbers that would help reduce the amount of biologicals you leave behind. And so there's several steps that need to take place before you even start the C&D process, and that's where I go into the idea of clearing. So the idea of clearing is to remove organic material from the area you're trying to clean and disinfect. And so a lot of times when we talk about chicken coops, when we talk about drinkers and things like this is where you're dumping out the material that is there. You're sweeping, you're picking up and cleaning all the manure, all the litter, anything that is there, you're going to remove that first. Then you're sweeping and dry cleaning A lot of times backpack blowers, leaf blowers, and things like this will help clean the little fine particles that you see there. That's very important because these fine particles sometimes find their ways into nooks and crannies, and then it makes it really hard for the soaps and later for the disinfectants to get in there and sanitize things. So the removal and then the sweeping and dry cleaning is a very important process. The sweeping actually does another action too, in the fact that it helps sand or kind of agitate biomaterial off of surfaces as well. So it reduces the thickness of these biofilms and makes it easier for the soaps to work. Then, if it's at all possible, pre-rinsing, especially with hot water if it's available, soaping, using a detergent. What the detergent does is it actually forms a special bond that takes inorganic materials and organic materials that are hydrophobic, which means that they are afraid of water, and it makes them hygroscopic. It saponifies it. It actually encapsulates the dirts and other soils and helps make it dissolvable in water so that you can rinse it away. So soaping and the actual scrubbing are important parts of it. The scrubbing actually with a brush gets that soap in and helps incorporate it, if you think about it, like almost like making a cake, where you're moving this material together to homogenize it, to get it into the soap so that as you rinse the soap, the dirt goes away as well. So then rinsing is an important part because that helps get rid of the soap and the dirt as with the soap. And then sanitizing and allowing for the sanitizer contact time. That's the time that the sanitizer actually remains on the surfaces, is an important part of that last step of disinfection. So you select the disinfectant for the type of surfaces that you're trying to clean, and then you allow that material to sit in that disinfectant. We see this a lot of times in food service, a three-bottom sink. This is why there's a three-bottom sink or three vessels in a sink at a food prep area, so that you have a soap, a rinse, and a sanitizer bath. And so even in handling dishes, there's a three-step process to cleaning and disinfection of even dishes. Oh, and the last thing I forgot to say is that foaming, the actual foaming of the disinfectant helps because it creates a foam that makes it a little more sticky, and it will sit on vertical spots a little easier. This is a foam unit, for example, that takes a concentrate and blows it out with water pressure off of a hose, creating this foam that you can see here that sticks to most materials. So foaming does help with the sanitation. So why do we disinfect at all? Okay, so this is the part that a lot of people don't realize, is that bugs have a normal operational environment. If we think about the bugs that live within us, think about it. They live at a pH of around 7 or so within our bodies, and they live at a temperature of 98.6. Hopefully, that's what your temperature is, our normal temperature. And so our bodies tend to help us when we get overloaded with a lot of bacteria. For example, if we have too much bacteria or viruses in our system, what happens? Well, we run a fever. So what is that doing? Well, what it's doing is it's pushing the environment out of the normal zone of the viruses in our system. So when we run a fever, that's what we're doing. We're actually cooking the bad bacteria, the bad viruses in our systems until it's rid of our bodies. And then what happens? We return back to normal. Okay. If we get too high, well, then we actually shut down some of the cells in the same manner that we're killing the bacteria and the viruses. So that's why fever reducers are there, because sometimes our body gets a little carried away. Another way of killing bacteria too is pushing them out of their normal pH zone. And so sometimes we will add acids that will reduce the pH and push it to the left here. Sometimes we'll add alkali agents and actually push the pH to the right. Bleach, for example, pushes the pH to the right and makes it a more basic solution. So our bacteria, the bacteria and viruses that we deal with, a lot of times have certain narrow life zones. And what we do by our cleaning and disinfection methods is to push these agents out of their normal zone so that they're killed. Two areas that we always need to think about when we're cleaning and disinfecting around the farm is our actual feet and hands, because these are contact areas that are very common and are touching a lot of different things. So you're never, I haven't seen anybody levitate around a poultry farm, but so you're walking through things, and so you're carrying things from one place to another. And so what we do is we typically take breaks throughout our progression in and out of the farm to stop and disinfect our feet and our hands. That way we help break the cycle of disease. And you can see also here coveralls, which is another physical barrier that we put up to help prevent bacteria and viruses from being carried into the farm. Something similar that you can use at your farm is poultry boots, boots that are only used within your pens or area, something that is washable, gaiters. What are the rubber shoes? I think they're gaiters that you can wear. Those things can actually be dunked and washed off after you're done using them. I see a lot of people use hand sanitizers, and they're fine, but they don't really replace the idea of good soap and water and then a sanitizer. Okay, so the important thing to remember is that clean objects are easier to sanitize than dirty objects, simply because if there's a film between what you're trying to sanitize and the sanitizer, then that sanitizer isn't going to get to the surface that you're trying to sanitize. And so it's important that you clean it first so that the surface is open to the sanitizer. So when we look at the list of disinfectants, there's a wide array of disinfectants out there, as well as the things that we're trying to control. And so from the easiest things, the mycoplasmas and the gram-positive bacteria, all the way down to the prion level and coccidia, which are encapsulated oocysts there that infect poultry, there are some things that work very well and some things that don't. And so depending on the type of surfaces you're trying to disinfect, as well as the agents you're trying to prevent from getting onto the surface or to remove these agents from the surfaces, that will determine whether or not you're going to use certain classes of disinfectants. And this is from the Center of Food Security and Public Health at Iowa State, and it's readily available online. There's others that look just like this, that show what we call the activity level. So the classes of chemical disinfectants that are available to us are wide, but what you're looking for is for those disinfectants that have a high activity and are highly effective against the agents that you're looking at. So if I'm thinking about bacteria, for example, I would choose an alcohol, for example, that has high activity over those of an acid that would have some effectiveness but not as effective as an alcohol. So that's why when you go to the doctor to get a flu shot, for example, they rub your arm with isopropyl alcohol, because the isopropyl alcohol is good at removing everything here in the blue, which is quite a few of the bacterias that are common in our area. So that's why you see these double marks here. For example, with Pseudomonas, quat ammonia does not have any activity that we know of. So it's very important that if you know what you have, then you know what you can use. In those cases that you don't know, then you look for general groups of disinfectants that would cover a wide area of agents. And so there are a few out there, and they're very common to what we can use in the field. Most of the time, ammonium contents will work, as well as oxidizing agents will work, such as hydrogen peroxide, for example, is very effective against a large group of different agents. Okay? So alkalis as well has some effectiveness. So the common disinfectants that I see and use quite a bit are phenolic compounds like Lysol. I use Lysol quite a bit. The quaternary ammoniums, Virocid, for example, is an example of that. The peroxide group, which are oxidizers such as the Virkon S, these things tend to run a little bit high as far as costs, so I tend to use more of the Lysols than I do of the Virkons. I save the peroxides for events that require me to have a higher level of disinfection. And then one that's out there that a lot of people forget about is actually pretty good is chlorine bleach. There are limits to each of these too. And so with the phenolics, they have a wide germicidal range, but they don't work against spores. So it depends on if you're trying to break the spread of something. It has a low toxicity to plants and animals, and it has low corrosiveness. It's very effective. Phenolics are very effective in high organic matter backgrounds. That certainly doesn't mean it's a general all-purpose cleaner and disinfectant unless it actually has soap mixed in with it. So you have to read the label. Most of the times, I'm usually using a regular soap. A lot of times I'm using actually dishwashing soap like Dawn or some other general detergent, and then I use a disinfectant that doesn't have that soap in it. And the one thing about phenolics too is that they act as good deodorizers. So if you have something that is a little stinky, usually Lysol and others, they usually have a perfume that is attached to it that works fairly well. Quaternary ammonium compounds, they have a limited range in what they can use. They're effective against bacteria, fungi, and viruses. They have a reduced activity within organic matter. So things have to be really, really clean before you use a quaternary ammonia. They are non-irritating. They have a low toxicity to people. There is some residual activity. So a lot of times we see this used, for example, quaternaries in hatcheries where we're actually cleaning the hatchery, to within an inch of its life, and then we're foaming quats on all surfaces because it does work against bacteria, fungi, and viruses. And it's fairly cheap. Oxidizers such as Virkon, these oxidizers have a moderate to wide germicidal activity. They're really rendered inactive in the presence of organic matter. They are, to a certain degree, corrosive. You have to be careful of that, especially on sensitive materials. Sometimes you'll see pitting of either painted surfaces, or sometimes we'll see this with stainless. It'll dull stainless steel. But it has a wide germicidal activity. So a lot of times I see veterinarians carry Virkon S because of the wide variety of situations they run into. And a lot of times they'll use that as their first line of disinfection. but they do come, this stuff is a little expensive. And so you have to watch out for that. Chlorine bleach, chlorides are good, but they only work well on clean surfaces. And the contact time that you have with chlorine is important. You need to leave it sit for a little period of time, and it does work fairly well across a wide range of agents. But it has to be, like I said, absolutely clean. If it has a lot of organic matter, chlorine bleach just falls flat as far as a disinfectant. One thing that people forget to use as a disinfectant, and something we found out through our high-path AI outbreak, was the use of heat as a disinfectant. In fact, the added heat would actually work as a general disinfectant. And so if you wanted to, have you had small items like scissors or something like that, you can actually put them in the oven and warm them up a little bit to where you would get them above 100 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes, and that would be enough to kill a lot of the bad bacteria that you would see. It was common practice years and years ago to actually put things out in what we call sunshine tables, where you would expose surfaces to the radiation from the sun, and that does work. But you need to, think about, you can't do that on a cold February morning sometimes. So heat does have its advantages and disadvantages, of course. So our alcohols, alcoholic compounds, like isopropyl and ethyl alcohol, these are limited as far as organic situations. You can use them as disinfectants. They have a wide range, and they're non-corrosive. But of course, with alcohol, think about what they are. They are very flammable, so you have to be careful. And it does have limited residual activity due to the evaporation of the alcohol themselves. Because if you think about it, alcohol works as a desiccant. It actually breaks the cells apart by removing the water from the cell. It's not considered good against spores, fungal or bacterial spores, but it's really, really good. And I see alcohol used quite a bit for sterilizing and disinfecting small instruments. It's usually fairly expensive if you're using it for large areas, but for smaller applications, it does work fairly well. It needs to be used at around 60 to 70%. That's almost straight out of the bottle. If you think about isopropyl alcohol, it needs to be used straight out of the bottle, undiluted, for its most effective use. So it does get a little pricey, especially if you're using a lot of it. But if you have a special situation and you have nothing else around, rubbing alcohol works very, very well as a disinfectant, followed by a rinse with water before you turn it loose into the pens again. Then organic acids and inorganic acids, acetic and other acids, citric acid, for example, acetic acid, which are found in vinegar, for example, can be used as an organic acid. It has to be sourced from a plant-based process. So cider vinegar, for example, would be an organic acid that could be used as a disinfectant. You would probably use it straight out of the bottle at 5% to get the best use out of that. It does leave behind a taste, so you have to be careful of that, and residual that you would have to rinse, especially if you're using it to rinse and clean watering equipment. Coal tars are highly effective, as it has a wide germicidal activity, but it is corrosive and toxic at high levels. So this is something that I wouldn't use as a disinfectant for drinkers, but it would work very well for surfaces and air and pens. You have an excellent residual activity, but there is a heavy odor. Another one that would work very similar is pine sol, because it has pine oil in it, as well as a detergent. Those work fairly well as a sanitizer. Then lastly, aldehydes. Aldehydes have a wide germicidal activity. They also kill spores and funguses. There's slight to moderate efficacy in the presence of organic matter. There is some residual activity with aldehydes, but again, you would probably use it as a knockdown type of disinfectant. It is moderately toxic. In certain states, you probably won't be able to buy aldehydes simply because of the cancer warnings on it. You used to use potassium permanganate to make formaldehyde gas, and we used to gas disinfect our hatchery equipment. That has now gone by to topical sprays such as these, which are a little more safe. So there's a wide variety of different things that are out there. Many of them, like I said, Lysol, Pine Sol, alcohols, citric acid, for example, acetic acid, are all available to you and probably are in your houses right now that you could use as an effective disinfectant once you cleaned and you cleaned your materials and soaped and washed them well. So if you have a clean surface, these disinfectants will work very, very well with what you're trying to do. So remember, it's a multiplier approach. There's a multiple step approach to doing this. You need to think about clearing, then cleaning before you disinfect. So that includes cleaning the materials, the bulk materials, washing with soap and scrubbing to get the clean portion of the process done, and then applying a general disinfectant to kill whatever's left behind. There'll be a lot of material removed just from the soap and agitation portion of the C&D that will help make D part a lot more active. People spray a lot of disinfectant, trying to make up for bad sanitation practices. This is the case where more doesn't necessarily mean more effective. If you're trying to sanitize dirt, for example, at the end of the day, you still end up having dirt. And so it's important to make sure that the C portion of C&D is done very, very well so that the disinfectant works well and it doesn't negate or inactivate the disinfectant you're trying to use. The other thing to remember too is that if you can reduce the exposure, you're going to reduce the disease threat. And so just removing dirty articles and cleaning probably on a more cleaning more often probably will help reduce biofilms and other materials from building up within your areas. So the other part of it too is that it's not rocket science. A lot of it is what you have already at hand. I use common dishwashing liquids. In fact, yeah, I have a tub of Dawn, or a bottle of Dawn here in my office, and I use hand wipes, diaper wipes. My kids are in their mid-20s now, but I still have diaper wipes in my car. They're very handy at cleaning off hands. And then I have alcohol hand sanitizer to act as a sanitizing or disinfectant step after I wash and clean my hands. So even in the field, if you had hand sanitizer and diaper wipes, you can clean and disinfect your hands in the field, and that's important. So with that, that's about all I had for you today, and I'd be willing to answer your questions. Thank you for your time today, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Karen and Tammy, do you have any questions? If so, just type them in the chat box, and Greg will do a great job of answering your questions. And while you're thinking of your questions, I just want to mention that November's webinar is on essential oils and what are they and why use them with poultry. December, we're going to talk about ventilation and insulation for backyard poultry housing. January is poultry integrated pest management for flies, birds, and rodents. March, we're going to look at environmental enrichment for small and backyard flocks. So I hope you will check us out for future webinars. We do have several, over 50 past webinars. If you want to go to the extension.org/poultry, you will see links to the past webinars. Get there. The recording will be up shortly, probably tomorrow or, well, Monday maybe, because tomorrow's Friday.
And if you had questions for me offline, you can certainly email me at that email that you see there.
Again, I'll thank Greg for the time and effort to do this presentation today. Check out his blog at drbirdnotes.blogspot.com. Some interesting stuff that he puts up there. And as he said, if you have any specific questions that you think of later, you can email him. His email address is up there. So thank you very much. That's the end of the webinar for today.
Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.